When you feed the bees in the spring, it's a 1-to-1 ratio, 1 part water, 1 part sugar. By weight or volume, it doesn't matter. When you want to mix up your sugar, typically you could use hot water out of the tap. Depends on how hot your water is, but you know, most of the time your hot water is hot enough to dissolve the sugar. I like to put mine in Arizona iced tea jugs. They're convenient, they're sturdy. If you leave a jug out and it gets a little bit funky, that's okay. You don't want to have it moldy if you can help it. So only mix up as much as you can. And if it starts to get sour, the bees may or may not take it. They're not going to take cold. So if you're going to feed the bees, one of the best things you could do is go out in the height of the afternoon, leave the bottle sit on a table or something, and let it warm up from the sun, and then pour it through. Whether you feed internally or externally depends on the temperature. Now that it's warm enough, as I said, you can get to a top feeder. If you're feeding internally, smoke the colony. And if you get to your second box, it looks like this, you're going to take the roof and just take it off. Take your inner cover and slide it over, and that should expose the inner feeder. If you have one box, you could do the same thing and then return it. You don't have to take the cover off and let all the bees out and end up crushing bees trying to put it in. Just pop the cover so it's loose, slide it over, fill it, slide it back. I do recommend when you're using the internal feeder that you light your smoker and you wear a veil. This is the most common reason people get stung, is I'm just going to go feed the bees and I don't need a veil. You do. You want to just keep feeding. Now I say keep feeding with a caveat, don't overfeed. But the whole point of this is you're providing them the energy to grow. And when a colony is growing from a package or a nuke to a full-size colony, the amount of energy they expend to both build bees, build wax, go forage, get water, and all of those things, they need massive amounts of carbohydrates. So you're going to feed them the whole time. Now that said, you don't want to overfeed, and I'll talk a little bit about quantities, but the premise of this is it's also the nectar flow. And they would probably take nectar over what you feed them, depending on, again, every colony is different. Now, there are pollen substitutes and other things you could feed. People want to feed tea tinctures and stuff like that. I don't think you need to do that. Just sugar water right now. The pollen that they're getting from nature is far superior than anything you're going to buy from a store out of a bee catalog. If you are putting pollen patties, though, use small little Decacart size pollen patties. I'm not going to give you instruction because I actually don't want you to do it. But some people bought them. And so if you did, you can feed them to the bees. If you put that little piece of pollen patty right on the top bars over top of the brood nest, mostly sugar is what that's made up of, with pollen mixed in. Sometimes they eat them right down, and other times they don't bother with them. But if you don't have them, don't buy them. You don't need them right now. This is the instruction I just gave you. But the key here is that third bullet. Natural pollen is far superior than what you feed, and you want to build the best bees you can. Nutrition is extremely important. We recommend a man lake feeder for the top. I've talked about weather, chill. If you fill this thing and then it gets to be a cold night, 30, 40 degrees, we're not going to have those anymore. The liquid gets cold. If the next day it's a 50, 60 degrees overcast day, there's not enough heat radiated from the sun to heat the liquid inside, and the bees won't take cold liquid.
Kevin, there was a question in the chat about feeding molasses.
Molasses, I would feed them straight, simple, everyday sugar. table sugar. I would not feed them anything else. The challenge with molasses, the challenge with brown sugar is they're slightly caramelized, and that makes digestion problems for the bees. It's bad for it. So I would not feed them molasses. Now, if you have something like I did, we had a 5-pound jar of honey that we harvested, and we were trying to warm it up to decrystallize it, and the jar broke. Obviously, we're not going to eat the honey because it had glass in it, but we melted the honey and made a solution out of it like sugar water. I would not go buy store-bought honey. Only use natural honey that you got from your hive and you know what the source is. But no, don't use molasses. Use regular everyday table sugar. Many of us become familiar with running to, say, a Costco or a Walmart and buying 25-pound bags. When you fill your feeders, you can see you could put gallons on here. I don't know why they designed them to hold gallons, because you'll never feed gallons. And if you pour gallons in this thing, gallon of water is 8 pounds with sugar in it. It's a little bit heavier. It gets to be tough to move it around. You're going to feed quarts, not gallons, even though these are gallon feeders. And I just have to say that out loud. I mentioned before that I like Arizona jugs. And you can see I fed these hives. This is a fall shot. And I left the jug on top of every one of them, so I know which ones I fed and which ones I didn't. You drink a lot of iced tea or almond milk or whatever, anything that's a gallon container.
How long would one of those last? Like, how often do they refill? You just go off of the hive?
You know, the funny thing is you could pour a quart on there and it'll be gone in a couple hours, and you could pour a gallon on there and it'll be gone in a couple hours, and you could pour a quart on there and it'll be there a week and they won't touch it. It's hard to say. It all depends on the demands of the colony and what they need. I feel like sometimes they take it down because I like the water and not so much the food too. Most of the time, if you put a quart or two in, they'll take it on the overnight or in a couple days. Is the best answer I can give you. If you look at the picture on the left, you see the shiny. That is nectar that is ripened to honey. It looks very glass-like. If you feed the bees too much at this time of year, they will hoard it. And they will store it in every available cell, including all the cells of the brood nest. Now that picture on the bottom left, if it's not clear, and I'll show you a better picture in a few minutes, is capped brood. And everywhere a bee has emerged from the capped brood, the bees have backfilled it with honey. What's supposed to happen with the holes where bees emerge? The queen is supposed to lay. If the queen is not laying, then she's not producing pheromone, and there's no brood pheromone. And that sometimes leads to supersedure, replacement of the queen, and or swarming. So my suggestion would be, and follow up to the question we just had, is feed them a small amount to begin with. And if they're taking it down, you can increase it. But you also need to inspect the colony to make sure that they're not doing what you see on the side. You do not want to see the brood nest loaded with nectar and sugar solution. It slows down colony growth and it causes other problems. This is a frame where that's an explosion of that we just saw. And obviously this is a brood frame with all the capped brood. And as the bees emerge, the queen should be finding a place to lay, but she can't because they've packed it in. Now this is extreme. This poor queen was isolated to the top of the frame because she just couldn't find a place to lay because the beekeeper was overfeeding, and every single cell is filled. And they wanted to know, this is the call I took, why their hive swarmed. It's because they had no place to put anything and there was no brood in the colony. Quarter week, and then check your progress. If they're taking it down, give them more. And you know, the cool thing about a top feeder is you can put a cord in and you could check the next 2 days. You don't have to wait a week. But the typical rule of thumb is if there's flowers on the trees, they're probably not going to take it all. And gallons are not required. So follow what they take down and open up the colony and make sure that they're not backfilling the brood nest. Be patient with this, and you're going to continue to feed through July 4th, but be patient about how much you feed. You can always give more as you go along, but you don't want to overfeed in the beginning. It's one of the biggest mistakes a new beekeeper makes. And remember, we're in the height of the nectar flow. They have as much nectar as they could probably get from the world outside. So you probably don't need to feed that much. You're going to continue to feed till you have 2 boxes built out. Once they get to the honey box on the top, like the picture we showed earlier, you could slow it down or stop. If you want honey, then you're going to stop feeding because they're going to store that in your honey box and you'll have funny honey. You won't have real honey. My general sense is you're probably going to feed here and there until July 4th, when the colony should be built out. One last thing about feeding. This is not sugar solution, it's water. I show you 2 options here. Memorial Day is the traditional time when pools are opened. You want to have water out right now before people open their pools. If your neighbors have pools, put a water source between your bees and the pool. What you see on the top there is a bucket with floaties, and it would be ideal for you to put a little bit of salt in that water. Bees are attracted to that. They need the salt, and they also should have some sort of scent. You could put lemongrass, you could put anise. Some people even put bleach in there to keep the mosquitoes out, and they can smell the bleach. Remember, pool water is bleach, so it's not going to hurt them. Now, we always tell you never to feed at the entrance with the Boardman feeder. That's that little mayonnaise jar feeder you see sitting on the concrete block. But you could use them to put water right at the front door. The bad news about that is you have to fill it all the time for water. But the good news is it's a very efficient way for them. They're not even going to have to fly out. The water bees, if they can find it, get it right there at the entrance.